Hello, guys. This is Mr. Friedoff. I am going to go through my PowerPoint and lecture just like I would to you if you were in class. This is just going to help you with just taking notes and kind of just hearing somebody talk about the information. So what I would do is I'd just get your notes out and I would start writing down the notes. You can pause this video as we go through each slide and write down the notes and then just listen to me lecture if you'd like. However you want to do it, just make sure you get these notes. I'm going to split this up into 2 days. So we're going to go over day 1 and then day 2's on the next day. So we're going to split this chapter up into two sections. Metabolism. This is these complete chemical reactions to sustain life in an organism. We think of metabolism, you probably have heard, oh, you have a fast metabolism, because usually when you're a kid, you do burn a lot of energy. But these are all the chemical reactions that we're going to see to maintain life, and that is photosynthesis as well. Cellular respiration is where we're going to break down glucose to produce ATP. This is going to occur in the mitochondria of your cells, and we're going to produce that high energy molecule called ATP. All right, so cellular respiration is going to be the process again where we break down glucose, and we're going to use oxygen to do that. But we're also going to produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So these are our inputs to cellular respiration: glucose and oxygen. Our outputs, that's what comes out of this reaction: carbon dioxide, water, and energy. If you look at these, you're going to notice a similarity to photosynthesis. So after you're done writing this, I'm going to show you the similarity to photosynthesis. So again, we're inputting glucose and oxygen, and we're outputting carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So when you breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide that you broke down from glucose. All right, so if you look here with photosynthesis and cellular respiration, they're kind of reverse reactions. In photosynthesis, we took in carbon dioxide and water, and we produce glucose and oxygen. In cellular respiration, we're going to intake glucose and oxygen, and we're going to produce water and carbon dioxide. That's why, again, we love plants. Plants love us. There's it's called a coupled reaction where the products of one are going to go into the reactants of the other. And again, so we're essentially getting energy from the sun. So not directly, but we do get it through eating things that produce glucose. Another important aspect, like I just went over, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite reactions. So just write this down at the top here. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite reactions. With the inputs of one or the outputs of the other, again, these are coupled. They go back and forth. We need photosynthesis. Plants need us. It's a coupled reaction. Here is that the reaction more in a chemical reaction format. Again, I showed you this with photosynthesis. Just again, we're inputting glucose, C6H12O6, and 6 oxygens. We're getting out water, carbon dioxide, and 38 ATP. Make sure you do write this down. We do produce 38 ATP per glucose, and that's really important. ATP, remember, is the high energy molecule. This is like your fully charged battery. ADP is like your dead battery. We have to recharge that dead battery to make it energized. And we're going to do that specifically with ADP and ATP from the energy from food. So you eat food to get energy to sustain your life, to do your stuff that you have to do, your cellular processes. When you have ATP, it's going to break down into that ADP in a phosphate group, but it's going to release energy for our cells to do work. Remember that ATP has 3 phosphate groups and ADP has 2 phosphate groups. You can see here, this is the adenosine and ribose part of the ATP molecule. There are 3 phosphate groups here for ATP because it's an adenosine triphosphate. For ADP, there's only 2 phosphate groups. So between the last 2 phosphate groups, this bond, that's where all the energy or the potential energy is going to be stored. All right, so the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria. I'm sure you've all heard of this before. Couple things about the mitochondria. It has 2 membranes. The matrix, this is the liquid inside of the inner membrane. This is just like the cytoplasm of the mitochondria. The intermembrane space is between the 2 membranes here. Since there's 2 membranes, we have something called the intermembrane space. And cristae, these are little folds in the inner membrane that increase surface area. So if you see this when we're going over cellular respiration, just to be able to identify each one. So the mitochondria has 2 membranes. We have the mitochondrial matrix, intermembrane space, and the cristae. So everything that we've gone over so far is kind of the basics of cellular respiration. We're going to look at the 4 steps of cellular respiration. Now, I go back and forth on whether I want you guys to memorize these. I really, this year I plan not to, but I do want to at least expose you and show you to these steps and show you the complexity here. So I'm not going to have you write down these 4 steps in order right now because we're going to get to each step here in a second. But what I want you to do is be able to just understand a couple of the key concepts here. That we're starting out with glucose, and we're going to send that glucose through these 4 different steps, and we're going to see ATP being produced. All right, glycolysis. If we break down glycolysis, glyco means sugar, lysis means to break. This occurs in the cytoplasm. One glucose molecule, you can see here the 6-carbon molecule, is going to be broken down into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvates. Now, there's 2 main steps here. We have to understand that we have to spend money to make money. We have to spend ATP to make ATP. I give an analogy of if you start a business, you can't just poof, have a business. You have to put money into that business. So let's say if you're starting a hair salon business, you have to put money into that salon business, like buying equipment and paying your staff before you can actually make money. So we use 2 ATP, but we produce 4 ATP. So our net total of ATP is 2. So it's like if you spend $2, but you made $4, you really only made $2. We're also going to produce something called NADH. We're going to talk about NADH later on. All right, after the first step, glycolysis, we're going to see the prep step. The prep step occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. This is where pyruvate, which is 3 carbons, gets converted into something called acetyl-CoA. We're going to produce CO2. We're going to produce NADH. And this whole process occurs twice because we have 2 pyruvates coming in from the glycolysis step. Those 2 pyruvates are going to be changed into 2 acetyl-CoAs. After the prep step, the acetyl-CoAs go into a process called the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. Now, this whole cycle is going to turn in this kind of like pathway. It's called a cyclic pathway. For one turn, we produce 3 NADHs, 1 FADH2s, 2 CO2s, and 1 ATP. However, we're going to get 2 acetyl-CoAs from the prep step, which means we have to double everything. So we make 6 NADHs, 2 FADH2s, 4 CO2s, and 2 ATPs. Understand that these CO2s are what you breathe out. So when you breathe out CO2, you're breathing out the CO2 produced in the Krebs cycle and the prep step. When you use energy, you're using ATP you made here in glycolysis and in the Krebs cycle. We're going to use NADH and FADH2s here in a little bit, but just understand these are like high energy molecules. They store energy. On to the last step, the electron transport chain. This is going to occur at the inner mitochondrial membrane. So what happens is all of these NADHs and FADH2s that are going to be produced in the first 3 steps are going to donate their hydrogen ions, these H plus guys right here, which are going to start building up in the inner membrane space. So once we have a bunch of these hydrogen ions in the inner membrane space, we're going to create this high concentration of hydrogen ions and a low concentration of hydrogen ions in the matrix. What's going to happen is those hydrogen ions are going to move through something called ATP synthase. ATP synthase is going to bond a phosphate group to a DP, making it ATP. This is because the hydrogen ions are going to have a high concentration in the inner membrane space, and they're going to want to move to a low concentration in the matrix. Now, this step also requires oxygen. Oxygen is going to bond with the electrons and hydrogen ions to form water. If there's no oxygen, this step doesn't occur, the Krebs cycle doesn't occur, and the prep step doesn't occur. I'll show you a different diagram of the mitochondria. You can see here the inner membrane space. This is where we're going to build up those hydrogen ions that are going to move through ATP synthase. There's going to be a high concentration in this dark red area and a low concentration of those hydrogen ions in the matrix here. They're going to move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. They're going to do that through ATP synthase. All right, ATP synthase. Again, it's located on the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is going to bond an ADP molecule with a phosphate group. Remember, when we bond that ADP molecule with a phosphate group, we're going to make ATP. Now, a total of 34 ATP are going to be produced at this step per glucose. That's a lot of ATP. We make a majority of our ATP at the electron transport chain. We make about 90% of our ATP here. This is actually what ATP synthase looks like. It's a really cool molecule. It's going to turn and it's going to bond a phosphate group to ADP. Remember, ADP has two phosphate groups. When we add a third, it makes it ATP, and that's that high energy molecule that our bodies are going to use for energy. This is actually what it looks like in your mitochondria. It's my favorite enzyme. It looks really cool. Here's another representation of what goes on here. You can see these hydrogen ions that we got from NADH and FADH2 are going to move through the ATP synthase. They are going to turn that ATP synthase, which bonds a phosphate group to ADP. When you bond a phosphate group to ADP, it makes it ATP, and that's where we get our energy from. So if we look here, we have glycolysis that makes two NADHs and two ATPs. Our prep step also makes two NADHs, but it doesn't make anything else. The citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, makes 6 NADHs, 2 FADH2s, and 2 ATP. So up until the citric acid cycle, we only make a net total of 4 ATP. We don't make a lot of ATP in the first 3 steps. However, for every NADH, we're going to make about 3 ATP. So if you look here, we have 10 NADHs from the first 3 steps. That's going to produce 30 ATP. Those 2 FADH2 molecules are going to produce around 2 ATP per FADH2, which is going to total to 4, which makes 34 ATP be produced from the electron transport chain. So what I'm showing you here is glycolysis makes a little bit of ATP, the citric acid cycle makes a little bit of ATP, the electron transport chain makes a lot of ATP, and our total net ATP for a glucose molecule is 38.